Lara, are you okay?
Of course I'm not okay. God, who are you?
I don't know how to answer that.
I'm Batman.
Talk.
Yo, what is up guys, it's TyrantX1 here, and welcome to another game review. This time I'm reviewing Watch Dogs, a third-person action adventure developed and published by Ubisoft. Now, you are in the city of Chicago, and you are known as Aiden Pierce, a hacker vigilante, who pretty much has a pretty dark past, as the story begins with him failing an attempt at robbing a hotel, and of course, because of this, there were severe consequences to his family's life, and his sister's daughter was killed in an accident. Now he's vowed to find the guys who killed her and get revenge. But of course, on his path to revenge, a lot of things do happen in the story. Now, Watch Dogs' story compared to other Ubisoft games that I've experienced in the past, especially as of late, isn't particularly bad. There have been worse games especially when it comes to Ubisoft, I've seen worse stories. And Watch Dogs isn't particularly that bad. There probably is some moments that are okay, but most of the time the story is pretty much just usual Ubisoft game. But it pretty much starts out with Aiden trying to basically find revenge for his sister's daughter's death, but he gets caught up in a lot of things on that path to revenge. Like, a lot of stuff he has to do which ends up getting him sidetracked, pretty much. Like for example, his own sister gets kidnapped by his own friend, old friend, who pretty much turns out to be the main villain. It's very difficult to say who the hell the main villain is of this game, because you have this mob boss, and then you have Aiden's older friend, or previous friend, Damien, who turns out pretty much to be the final boss in the end. So it's kind of difficult to say who is the main bad guy of this game. It's like the game doesn't necessarily clarify who it is, because you killed the mob boss guy before you even killed Damien. And the story does go at a relatively decent enough pace. It does start to get a bit more hectic, only slightly, the more you go through. And the characters that are in this game aren't particularly too bad. Aiden Pierce, there's only pretty much probably two characters I really give a damn about. Aiden Pierce being one of them, and to be honest, he just felt like a civilian Batman in some cases, or a Batman wannabe, which is kind of makes sense, considering he's a vigilante and he pretty much hacks into a lot of stuff, and he's on a path to revenge. Makes very similar. And then there's another character called Clara, and she was actually okay for a main female character, but the game doesn't really offer as many decent characters. Hell, the villains weren't really decent themselves. Like, Damien just didn't feel like threatening or anything, and then the mob boss guy himself was just a creepy old dude. And that's pretty much it. The characters didn't really offer me much for this game, and so it felt like the story wasn't particularly that great because of their performance. So yeah, the only characters I really did give a shit about were Aiden and Clara, and the fact that this story goes by in 5 acts, pretty much a lot like Gears of War does. But there's actually quite a lot of missions, and the missions in each of the acts is very different. Like, the first 2 acts are pretty much the longest aspects of the game. Act 1 has 9 missions, Act 2 has 15, Act 3 has 6, Act 4 has 8, and then Act 5 has just the 1. Now, the missions themselves, these missions, aren't very long. There is some missions that will be probably will take you a good 20 minutes or 25 minutes, but a lot of the missions aren't very long. Pretty much the longest missions are pretty much the final missions of each act. They are pretty much the very long ones. And so yeah, pretty much the meat of this game isn't really in the campaign's missions. It's pretty much more in the side stuff. Now, another disappointing aspect of the story is the fact that the way the game ends is just the typical Ubisoft fashion or something, which is very disappointing. Hell, it pretty much ends with a very quick time event, and you're pretty much done. It does have a sort of a two-choice thing at the end, but that doesn't really have a major impact on the game itself, unless they do something with that in Watch Dogs 2, which I really severely doubt. So yeah, the story isn't particularly strong, not as bad as other Ubisoft games, as there were a few moments that I actually did have some interest in. But overall, yeah, this is really not much that will keep you going with it. I mean, there's only 2 characters that pretty much allow me to keep going with it, and one of them died anyway. So yeah. And the ending itself is just the typical Ubisoft fashion way of ending. Watch Dogs was pretty much the beginning of Ubisoft's decline in making good games, because before this we had, what, Far Cry 3, which is probably the best game I've seen Ubisoft make. And considering this was 2014 when Watch Dogs came out, this was definitely a big decline for Ubisoft itself, because after this, every game they pretty much pumped out was pretty much shit. Now, the mechanics for this game are a little bit different compared to other Ubisoft games. The controls are certainly different, and you might be a little confused by the controls at first, especially when it comes to like reloading, taking cover, and a few other things. So yeah, the controls are a little bit mashed up in different positions. But Ubisoft usually does take this route, and this isn't really a first, and we have seen this in the Rainbow Six games. And so it's not really a surprise that they decided to do it again with Watch Dogs. But other than that, most of the mechanics of the game are pretty much usually like what you see in most open world type games. You do have like a good selection of weapons to choose from in this game, ranging from assault rifles, SMGs, pistols, sniper rifles, shotguns, and even grenade launchers, which can be all very handy, and a lot of these weapons are very useful. But most of this game is based around stealth, so pretty much once you get a gun that's pretty much suppressed, and there's only a few weapons in this game that are suppressed, so pretty much most of the time, you're going to be using a suppressed weapon until it gets to some of the other missions which require you to be a bit more louder, which a grenade launcher is pretty much your best bet. There is also a bunch of like other gadgets that you can use that will help you out when it comes to trying to like get away from your enemies or trying to get rid of them. Like for example, you have IEDs, grenades, proximity IEDs. There's 2 types, ones you can manually activate and ones that will activate on sensors. There's even other little tiny gadgets like blackouts, which will cause like entire sections of the city to like, you know, go dark, which can be very useful for sneaking away. There's even lures to get your enemy into where you want them. And I think this game was actually very good with how it uses gadgets and like some of its weapons. The disappointing fact is that you can't customize your weapons. Now, yes, that is a little bit disappointing, but there is a nice selection of weapons. And you can pretty much be able to buy them all as well. And you can unlock a few by doing certain things as well. Now, of course, when it comes to being a hacker, there is some advantages when it comes to, especially when it comes to driving around a city. Like a lot of the time when you upgrade yourself, you can actually like hack certain things that will actually impact the enemy's like chase on you. Like when you're in a car and you're trying to get away from the cops or like some other rival gang, there's bits of the city that you can hack, like traffic lights, steam pipes, blockers, even bridges, which can be used to get away from enemies. And I think this is a very cool aspect of the game, and hell, you can even do this to disable helicopters as well. But of course, this does cost you battery life on your phone, so you can't just spam the damn thing all the time. There is a point where you can't do it. And you can obviously upgrade yourself over time by, like, you know, doing missions and sides missions and stuff, which is used for upgrading your skill points, which is combat, combat, hacking, driving, and one other one I cannot quite remember. So yeah, I think when it comes to the skill tree, they're actually pretty decent, but it's kind of annoying that you have to do certain side stuff just to unlock specific skills, which makes me feel like just add on a bit more game time. Yeah, pretty much. And this game is not that long when you think about it. It pretty much took me about 37 hours overall, which did even include the side missions themselves. And so yeah, this game, if you pretty much put your all into it, it doesn't necessarily take that long, especially considering the main missions themselves are short. The side missions themselves actually were okay, to be honest. Like, you have criminal convoys, you have like fixer contracts, which even when you do like complete the certain amount that there is, they still keep spawning in, so you can like get XP and stuff like that. Gang hideouts. There is the side missions aren't too bad, and especially the fixer contracts, which aren't always the same thing. They do sort of like, they are kind of random to what your objective is. So when it comes to the side missions, it's kind of funny how they're the more fun aspect of the game. And then there's the hacking itself, like when you get into like when you breach an area. It is actually, the hacking isn't too bad, and it can be quite complex sometimes. Not all the time, most of the time it's particularly easy, but there's some few instances where it can be a little bit more difficult and you have to figure it out. So yeah, I think, and there's also that you can customize Aiden himself, though it's just basically the same jacket and stuff, just different colours, but there's a nice amount of different selection of colours. And then you can also drive a nice variety of cars. Now, you can't customize your cars either. So a game basically where it's open world and you can't customize your weapons or your vehicles is a little disappointing. And the cars themselves aren't that decent. Compared to Ghost Recon Wildlands, the driving mechanics are better in this game, that's for sure, but there's not really much difference when it comes to the vehicles themselves. They're tougher, I'll give them that. But the handling isn't very different on most of the vehicles. Some are slower, some are faster, some brake better, some don't brake as good. So there isn't really much difference what kind of vehicle you get, because as long as you have your hacking ability with you, then it doesn't really matter what kind of vehicle you have to get away from the enemies. And hell, when it comes to getting away from the police themselves, all you need to, enemy gangs, all you need to do is just get on a boat. If you have like a 5-star rating, all you can do is just get on a frigging boat and that's it. You can just sail away and you're fine. So it's kind of like it's like kind of like a cheat code, really. You don't need to activate, you just need to overuse it and you're fine. And that's pretty much what I did in most of the time when I was being chased by cops or gangs. I just got myself to a boat and got the hell out of there. So yeah, so there's a few things in this game that you can sort of use to your advantage. And this can be particularly useful in some missions, especially where the going gets a little bit tougher. But yeah, overall I think the mechanics and some of the weapons do operate decently, and the vehicles are at least better than what they were in Ghost Recon Wildlands. But there's a severe lack of customization and stuff like that. And the vehicles themselves. There's quite a lot of stuff in this game that's, like, just doesn't feel like there was a lot of effort put into. But there was in other aspects, like when it came to the skill points, like the skill tree, the side missions, I felt like those were okay. They weren't bad, and they weren't, but they weren't amazing, but they were okay. But then other aspects I feel like we're missing a bunch of stuff.
What's a couple of bottom feeders doing?
Now, as per usual in each of the Ubisoft games I played, there is collectibles. But the collectibles in this game actually were okay to get. They weren't boring as usual as you find in most Ubisoft games. And you do actually get rewards, you do get rewards in most of the other Ubisoft games with collectibles too. But I felt like these were pretty alright. Like, you have QR codes to find, you have C2S towers which will unlock areas around the map, you have like privacy invasions, which are pretty interesting, though kind of weird, where you like interrupt people's day-to-day lives. And you might end up encountering some really strange stuff. Like, sometimes you'll just find people talking, having some arguments, but then you'll find some really weird stuff, like this one time where you find an almost nude woman shooting a BB gun at some dude. And another one where there is a guy basically doing some weird stuff with a mannequin. So yeah, you can find some really weird shit at times with the whole privacy invasion. And of course there is some other stuff like investigations where you're finding missing people and stuff like that. And what's really interesting is how when you pretty much get to the final bit of these collectibles, there is like a final mission to them, which I thought was actually pretty interesting. Like, you don't really see that with many games when it comes to collectibles. It's like when you get to the when you get to the final one, there's a mission behind it, which I thought was actually pretty interesting. Not only that, there is like recordings and audio stuff around the city where you can like get a bit more background info and stuff like that. And so yeah, that can be like, well, I wasn't really bothered by it pretty much most of the time, but it gives you some insight on the game's story. And the combat itself, like fighting the enemies is, yeah, the enemies weren't that amazing. It's like you have your usual infantrymen, you know, guys that just like shoot and stuff like that and throw grenades. And then you have like your enforcers, who are pretty much the juggernauts of this game. The enemies weren't particularly interesting, but to be honest, you are a hacker. You're not really made to fight, so I can kind of see why they didn't really go all out with the whole fighting and the enemies and stuff like that. I mean, hell, you can't even fly your vehicle. You can't even fly helicopters and stuff like that, so you're pretty much going to be stuck to the ground anyway. But yeah, the fighting mechanics themselves, I mean, you can shoot your enemy and get headshots and stuff like that, or you can take them down. What's really weird is the fact that even though you can take your enemies down, you can't just randomly punch people and stuff like that, which kind of was a bit weird. It's like usual open world games you can just randomly punch, yeah, with Watch Dogs you can't. But you can get your gun out and start shooting people. And that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Now there's also another thing, you have your vigilante, or well, not vigilante, but you have your popularity meter of sorts, which is basically the people's opinion on you, depending on your actions. So basically if you start randomly killing civilians, or even killing the police, your popularity levels will go down, and you'll be pretty much seen as a negative person. But if you do positive things like capturing criminals, or like busting down, you know, gang stuff, all that kind of things, your popularity will increase and people will start to see you as a hero. Now the thing is, this meter is completely pointless to the game. It does not matter what part of the meter you choose for. You can just be an asshole and get away with it no matter what. So this meter was completely pointless to the game. It would have been cool if that's actually made some connection for the ending, and if it did, if it made some connection to the ending, like there could have been 2 or 3 endings to this game if that meter had like a specific importance, but it really doesn't. And to be honest, I played throughout this entire game just trying to be a good guy, and by the end it had no, like, there was no consequence or something from it, and it just felt pointless. So hopefully maybe in Watch Dogs 2 they might improve upon this and actually make a bit more of a justifiable meaning from it. But yeah, it's like the music itself, I mean, there's not really much when it comes to the music, apart from like what you're seeing, like what you get in the radios in the cars. It was alright. I'm not really much of a musical person myself, but at least some of the tracks were decent in the radio. But yeah, other than, yeah, so there's quite a few things. Watch Dogs is a bit of a mixed game. Some aspects are actually okay, while others aren't particularly done as well. It has good mechanics, well, mostly. It has a lot of decent mechanics. A lot of the side missions are okay. The main missions themselves were particularly short, and the characters themselves could have done with some definite improvement, but then again, this is Ubisoft, so what the hell was I expecting? Then there's even like some sort of like these side activities in the game, like little tiny games that really have no point to this game. I played one, it's like chasing coins in a specific path without hitting these red skulls, and yeah, you pretty much get cash. And there's some other things like chess and drinking games, but they aren't really necessary, and I just thought, why are these in the game? So yeah, you can just avoid them anyway. But then again, apparently you have to do some of them so you can unlock certain skills in this game, but wasn't really bothered, to be honest. So yeah, overall I think Watch Dogs it's above average, just about. It's better than some Ubisoft games I've played, but pretty much from the hype that it was getting before its release back in 2014, Yeah, I have no idea what got the people were so hyped for this game. But, hell, at least I played it, and it wasn't as bad as I thought compared to other Ubisoft games that I've played. So overall, I'm going to give Watch Dogs a 6.5. So yeah, overall, that is my review of Watch Dogs. I feel like, yes, it was pretty much, I don't really see why people overhyped the hell out of this when it was coming out in 2014. But it wasn't as bad compared to other Ubisoft games I have played in the past, so hopefully Watch Dogs 2, when I get around to it, will end up being better than this. So, I hope you guys have enjoyed this review. Leave a like down below, subscribe, comment on what you think is right or wrong with the game, comment what you think what other games I could do, and I shall see you guys in the next random video.